Hello and welcome to another episode of How to Code a Game Like Minecraft in Unity. In this one we're going to be doing part 2 of our inventory system. So if you haven't watched the first part, you will need to see that part before doing this part, because none of this is going to make any sense without that part, which I did split into because it was just running a bit long. It ended up, after editing, the video ended up actually being more like half an hour recording wise. It was over an hour, which is why I split it into. But there was a lot of stuff that I didn't need to keep in the video. It was me rambling and things like that. So where we got to was we switched out our toolbar for a working inventory sort of management system where if we place a block down, it actually subtracts the amount from our inventory, or from our item slot. So in this episode we're going to actually implement drag and drop handling, and we're going to get straight into it by adding a drag and drop handler script. So let's go into our script. So the first thing we're going to need is we're going to call a serialize field because we don't need it to be public. Private UI item slot, which is the class, one of the classes that we made in the last video, and we're just going to call this cursor slot. And we're going to set it to equal null, because when you set something to serialize field in private, if you don't give it a value at any point or you don't initialize it, you'll get a warning in the inspector saying that this object is null and will always be null, because the code, the actual compiler or whatever it is that's reading the code, doesn't realize that we've set whatever we want this to be in the inspector. If it was public, it would assume that we're going to set it in the inspector, but because it's private, it doesn't know. And then we want a private item slot, and this one's going to be called cursor item slot, and this one we are initializing in the code, so we don't need to worry about setting it as null. And then some values that will make a bit more sense if you've seen the drag and drop handler tutorial that I did, that I mentioned in the last video, but we need these for our actual clicking and things. We need a reference to a graphics raycaster, which in order to use we are actually going to need the event system. And also we're going to need a UI system in this. And again, set that to null. And our last, I'm pretty sure our last one is the actual event system itself. So in our start, all we want to do in here is initialize our cursor item slot. And we're going to initialize it using just a UI item slot, because we also have the option to initialize it with items in it, but we're not going to have any items in it. I will explain what this slot is doing shortly. I'll tell a lie, we are going to need one other reference. We need a reference to our world, because we need to know if we're in the UI or not, which we cannot tell from in here presently, but we do have a bool in the world to tell us whether we are currently in a UI or not. So let's get our update function going. The first thing we want to do is if not world dot in UI return. So basically nothing is going to happen in the update loop for this function, for this script, unless we are in the UI, because it's just going to get to this point, check, see that we're not in the UI, and return out and let the rest of the game get on with things. And the next thing we're going to do is if input dot get mouse button down 0, which is the left mouse button, the standard clicking mouse button. And then in here we're going to be doing, well, we're going to be calling a function to do some stuff. But before we get to that, we're going to create another function, and this one is actually going to be a UI item slot. And we're going to call it check for slot. So in here, we need to assign our pointer event data, and we're going to equal a new pointer event data using our event system, which apparently I misspelled. Yes, I did. And then we set our position of our pointer event data to the mouse position, which we will get by using input.mousePosition. Nice and simple. The next thing we need to do is we create a list of type raycast result, which we're just going to call, oh, don't forget to close your brackets everybody, which we're just going to call results. And then we're going to cast our ray using our pointer event data. And we're going to pass in the list we've just created. And what that's going to do is it's going to cast a ray at the mouse position, wherever the mouse position is on the screen, and it's going to return a list containing all of the UI elements that are under the mouse at that position. If there is, for example, we've got our inventory slot. Our inventory slot has an icon in it, and both the inventory slot and the icon are over the top of a window, for example, like the toolbar window or the inventory window or whatever. It's going to return all of those objects in this list. So for that reason, we need to ensure that we are only looking at items that we're interested in. So we'll loop through all of the raycast results. And then in here, if result.gameObject.tag is equal to UI item slot, we want to return result.gameObject.UI.getComponent UI item slot. However, if we get through all this and we get to the end of this for each and we're still going, because bearing in mind that once we find an item slot in all the things that we've clicked on, we return. If we haven't returned and we get to here, that means that wherever we've clicked doesn't have a UI item slot or an object tagged as UI item slot there, in which case we're going to return null. And just before we forget, let's go over to our prefabs, find our item slot, open up that prefab, and we're going to have to create a new tag, UI item slot, and apply that to our object. Now we're only interested, we don't want it to apply to the icon and the text, anything else that you put in here. We're only interested in the item slot because we only want the one that has actually got a UI item slot script on it, and these don't. I'm not sure why I didn't get it now. I was fairly sure that it used to ask you if you wanted to apply tags to all of child objects on the one that you were applying it to. It didn't do it that time, and I'm not sure why. But if it does ask you that, don't. You only want it on the top parent item slot, the one that has the UI item slot script on it. We'll just do a quick look in here just to make sure it has actually updated. Yeah, as you can see, all of these are now UI item slots. So we'll go back into here. And what we're going to do, just to make sure everything's working, is here we're going to do if check for slot does not equal null, debug.log there is something we're going to need to do first. Somewhere in, I'm not entirely sure where we put it, as this has been a long series and some of it was a long time ago. Somewhere we turn the mouse off. There we go, cursor lock state, cursor lock mode. We need to undo this whenever we enter and leave UI mode. So because the way we set up our in-UI bool in world, we can just copy that and go find our in-UI bool, which is here, and then we say if in-UI, so if we are in UI, set that to none, else set it to locked. And then if we go into Unity, where I've got a couple of other little things left to do before we can actually test out the clicking. So if we need to put a drag and drop handler script somewhere, so I'm just going to put it on canvas. It doesn't really matter, I guess. You can arrange it however you want. I'm just going to put it there for ease. And we need to set these values. So our graphics raycaster is right here, so just drag that down there. Our event system is here, so we just drag that in there. Now we need a cursor slot. So this one is a bit different. We'll drag in a prefab, and we want it to be at the bottom of the hierarchy within the canvas, obviously. And we'll call this one cursor slot. We want to take away, we want to untag this one because this one doesn't count as far as clicking goes. We don't want to register this one as something we've clicked on because this, as you will see, is going to be the thing doing the clicking, essentially. So once we've done that, what else do we need to do? We want to get rid of this image script because we don't want a background image floating around everywhere. And also we need to up the scale of these because these are all scaled up. You would come up with a better way of handling the scaling of the UI system if you were using all this properly, but we're only just going through the basics. So if we go back to here and we drag in our cursor slot, and let's just, we'll turn off maximize on play so we can see the console. Let's just give this a quick spin, see if what happens. So nothing happens at first because it's set to not do anything unless we're in the UI. So let's go into the UI. So we can click and nothing's happening, but if I click here, we can see item slot clicked. And that's, if I uncollapse them, you'll see that it's registering every time I click on an item slot. However, if I click over here, it's not. So that's great. That's exactly what we want. So now that we know that the clicking and everything is working, let's start handling what happens when we click. So we need another function, which we are going to call, we'll just call it handle slot click. We'll just call it a handle slot click. It's just going to be a void. It's going to take in a UI item slot, which we're going to call click slot. So the first thing we're going to do is if click slot is equal to null, return. And what this allows us to do is it means that we can call it here and we can just pass in, without any sort of checks, we can just pass in the result of this function. So we say handle slot click, check for slot. And then basically, if this does return null, like that, then this function will just return back out. So we don't need to worry about checking that it's not null before calling this function. This function will handle that by itself. And now, basically, what we want to do is check everything. We need to cover every potential outcome of clicking on a UI item slot. So the first and most obvious one is if not cursor slot dot has item and not clicked slot has item, return. Because basically what we're saying there is the slot that we have clicked has nothing in it and we are not currently holding anything, so we don't need to do anything. So let's go on to the next potential outcome. If not cursor slot dot has item, but our clicked slot does have an item, then we actually have to do something. What we're going to do is first we're going to go into our UI item, our UI item slot. So this is going to be public. It's going to be of type item stack, and we're just going to call it take all. We're going to create an item stack, which we're going to call handover, and it's going to equal a new item stack, and then we're going to get the stack ID and stack amount from our stack in this item slot. Then we're going to empty the slot, and then we're going to return handover. And then if we go back to drag and drop handler, what we can do in here is say cursor item slot dot stack equals clicked slot dot item slot dot take all. Now we'll just quickly test that to make sure it works, because there is something else we need to do, but it'll be more obvious when I show you it working. So press I to quote enter our inventory, and if I click this now, you can see it's taken it out, but we can't see it anywhere. And the reason for that is we haven't set our cursor slot properly. So right now it's here, but it's not working right. So firstly, let's just go in here, set that to none because we've removed that. And then we want to go to our update function, and we're going to say cursor slot dot transform dot position equals input dot mouse position. So if we let's just zoom this out a little bit. So this is our cursor item slot. If we press play now, it should move with the mouse. There we go. It's moving around as the mouse moves. However, it's not updating. So just let me have a quick look and figure out why that is. Alright, it's not updating because we're not updating the slot. So cursor, what do we want to do? Cursor slot, that's what I called it. Cursor slot dot update slot. So now, if we press play and we go into our inventory system and I click this, you can see that we have picked up the actual item. Now we can't do anything else because we've only coded two eventualities. One is for them both being empty and one is for the cursor being empty and the inventory not. So let's just code some more. We go back to here. So our next potential, once we've done that, by the way, we return. We don't need to do anything else. So if it's the other, let's just copy this line. If it's the other way around, in fact, let's just copy the whole lot. So if it's the other way around, we're basically doing the exact same thing, but as you may have guessed it, the other way around. So this wants to be cursor item slot, and this wants to be click slot, and then this wants to be cursor item slot, click slot dot item. That wants to be click slot dot item slot, and this one doesn't want to be item slot, and then this one wants to be click slot, I think. Yeah. So now at the very least we should be able to pick items up and put them down into empty slots. So let's just test that. Pick it up, put it down. There we go. Now obviously if I try and put this in a slot that already has something in it, nothing's going to happen. And the reason for that is because we haven't coded what happens if both slots have an item in them. So let's get to that one. And this one is going to be the trickier of the potential outcomes. So if both of them have an item, we need to do a series of subchecks under this check. So the easiest check is both items are different. So if cursor slot dot item slot dot stack dot id does not equal click slot dot item slot dot stack dot id. So if they're currently carrying two different items, then what we want to do is we want to swap them basically. So we'll get our cursor slot, and remember take all empties the cursor slot. And that, you know, actually what we're going to do before we carry on, so we don't have to keep doing this, is we're going to do an opposite of the take all function, which is going to be public void insert stack, we'll call it. It takes in an item stack, and then all we're going to do is stack equals stack UI item slot dot update slot. So now instead of doing this, we're just gonna say cursor item slot dot insert stack, and then we pass this in, and then we no longer need to do this. And then exactly the same for here. Clicked item slot dot item slot dot insert stack. So now, when we insert the stack into this one, it's updating its own UI elements, and when we take it out of this one, it's also updating its own UI elements, which is going to make life down here a little bit easier. So we'll create another item stack, old slot, we'll just call it, and this is going to be clicked slot dot item slot dot take all. And so remember, using the take all command will empty these slots. So now that these slots are empty, we can go ahead and swap them over. So click slot dot item slot dot insert stack, and we're going to pass in the old cursor slot stack, and then cursor slot dot item slot dot insert stack, and we pass in the old slot. So let's run that again. So I can pick them up like before and put them down like before, and everything updates. Now if I click on one that has an item in it, it swaps them over. Great. So there is one other eventuality that you probably want to account for. I'm not going to go over it in this because it's not complicated. I'm sure you guys can figure it out. It's not complicated to do. It's just a bit tedious. And that is, if you're clicking two slots, if you're holding, say, 32 sand blocks and you're clicking on an inventory slot that has 12 sand blocks, in that situation, you wouldn't want to swap them over. You want them to combine them. You want to add them together. But where it comes in tricky is you will have to take into account stack sizes and how many you want to take from one or the other and all that kind of thing. Like I say, it's not complicated. It's easy enough to figure out. It's just tedious. And I'm trying to keep these videos to the important parts. But you would want to go into your world, find block types, and in here you would want to add like a public int stack size, and then you would say this is the, like, put in the amount that is the maximum that that block can be stacked, and then you would run your checks in here to make sure that you are never putting more than that amount in a UI item slot. And remember, these UI item slots are going to be used in any inventory, if you build a crafting table, anything like that. So these checks will be run on the slots themselves. It's not some other code somewhere else in the game that checks on this. The actual slots are what are doing the checking. So like I say, I'm not gonna cover it in this, but not because I don't think it's important enough, just because it's long and tedious, and I don't like this speech, and I don't think you guys need me to go over it for you because it's not complicated. It's just basic maths, just adding and subtracting. But what we do want to do is we want a creative menu inventory window. So let's just quickly make that before we finish up. So we'll go in here and we're going to create into our canvas, and we're going to create a panel. We'll call our panel creative inventory. And then if we go up to, we'll just double check what my toolbar width. Toolbar width is 218, so we want this to be the same width. So let's center it. We'll make it to, oh, it's scaled up, isn't it? Yeah, there we go. Height wise, let's just make it, yeah, that was good enough. We'll do the same thing we did with the image. So if we just copy component there and paste component values, it gives us the same background as our toolbar. And then inside our panel, what we're going to do is we're going to add a component, and we're looking for grid layout group. So our cell size wants to be 24 by 24. We're going to start it upper left, start axis horizontal. Yeah, that all looks fine. So what this is going to do is if I drag an item slot into here, and then I duplicate them, as you can see, it arranges them correctly. We've got our width a little bit out here. Is that because there is a margin? Let's just make that 216. There we go. Right, so bearing that in mind, let's create one last script for this video. Creative inventory. And this is essentially all just going to be start only. And we're going to need to take in a public game object slot prefab. So we're going to say, oh, sorry, we do need a world reference as well. So once again, world equals game object dot find world dot get component world. And we're going to say for each, no, we're going to let's do a regular for int I equals 1. This is what these are going to be, is the block ID index. So again, we're starting at 1 because we're not including the air block, which is block 0. For int I equals 1, I is less than world dot block types dot length I plus plus. And then we're going to instantiate a new slot. Game object new slot equals instantiate, and we're going to use our slot prefab, and we don't need to give it any positional data or anything like that because that's going to be handled by the grid layout. However, we do need to make sure it's a child of this object for all the grid positioning to take hold, so we can do that quite easily by passing it in here. So it will automatically instantiate as a child of this object. Let's just drag, before we forget, we'll just drag our script into place. and we want to drag our prefab across. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we're going to create a item stack. It's going to equal a new item stack, and we're just going to cast our index as a byte. The amount doesn't matter, so we'll just set it to 64 for now. So now we have our item stack, we actually need somewhere to put it. So let's just create a quick list item slots. This is just somewhere to store it. It doesn't actually matter whether we're not going to need to access this at all, but we do need somewhere to put these slots. So this is going to equal a new list item slot, and then for each one of these we're going to create a new item slot. So item slot equals new item slot. And then we're going to pass in a UI item slot, which is going to be new slot.getComponent UI item slot. And then the stack, we're just going to pass in that stack that we've just created. And I think if we run that, we should find we have our creative blocks. There we go. We have all of our creative blocks. We can pick them up like normal. Right, the reason that that's gone behind the window there is because the creative, so if you didn't already know this, the lower down in the hierarchy, the further up it shows. So everything is currently behind the creative menu as far as that's concerned. So we always want our cursor slot to be the bottom-most item in our canvas hierarchy. So if I just run that again, now it's on top of it. And of course we can swap these around, so that's what I mean about the inventory slot working independent of whatever container it's in. However, the problem we've got at the minute is that creative menu, we don't want to actually remove the item from it. So we're just going to add a couple of things in. So the first thing we're going to add is in item slot. Where are we? Item slot. Public bool is creative. And then in our drag and drop handler, we're just going to do a check at the top here. Again, it doesn't matter if it's null, so we'll let that return. It doesn't matter if neither items have anything in them, so we'll let that return. If click slot dot item slot dot is creative, so cursor item slot dot empty slot, we're just going to throw away whatever's in there. And then we're just going to take the stack, but we're not going to take the stack this time, if that makes sense. Insert stack, clicked slot dot item slot dot stack. And then back in our creative inventory, we're just going to say slot dot is creative equals true. So now if we go in here, we should be able, as you can see, we're taking 64 dirt out of there and we're leaving 64 there. Same with that, and it just gets rid of whatever we put there. So and I should be able to see, we haven't coded anything for what to do if both items are the same. But like I say, I'm just going to leave that to you guys because it's just more tedious coding on what is already a long 2-part video. But yeah, if we click these, we can pick up a full stack, and then we can put it down here, and then we can come out of the inventory and use them. But oh God, the blocks are a bit messed up with the icons because I've got leaves in there, but I haven't got an icon for leaves. But again, that's another thing it's not a big deal to fix. So the last thing we want to do is when we go in and out of our UI, we don't want to be looking at the creative mode, and we also don't want to be looking at the cursor. So if we just find our in UI, so in here, we're going to put we're going to turn everything on and off as we need it. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to bring in a reference for our, we'll just use public, it's fine. Public game object creative inventory window and public game object, we'll just call it cursor slot. And then when we go to our UI script, we're just going to say, so if we are in the UI, creative inventory window dot set active true, and then if we're not in the UI, false. And then exactly the same thing for cursor slot dot set active true, and then set active false. So we'll go back into Unity, drag those references in, cursor slot, creative inventory, and then disable those, because again we don't want them visible to start with. And now if we press play, there we go. When you enable your inventory, of course you've got the you could code whether you want the cursor slot that the mouse is attached to drop its item when it is when you exit out like that. Right now it's not gonna, it's still gonna store it. You'd have to tell it to specifically drop it, but in order to do that you would want to store the last place that this sand was before I picked it up, because when I press that, if you just drop it, it's gone. So obviously players would be a bit unhappy if they picked up a stack of something that they'd spent their time harvesting and then closed the inventory without putting it back in another slot and then lost it forever. So you'd want to store the last place that the sand was and then put it back there. But again, this is the same as the picking up items of the same type thing. It's just tedious coding that's not really worth covering in the video, because you guys are definitely smart enough to handle that. So that's going to be it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Once again, let me know what the thing you want me to cover most in the next Minecraft video is. I'm not sure when that video will be, because I've got a couple of videos I want to get done before that. But like I say, let me know in the comments what you'd like to see, what you'd like the next Minecraft video to cover. And that's it for now. Bye bye.